Thank you. Hi all, this is Begum from Medicortex. We're developing a non-invasive diagnostic test for traumatic brain injury. Traumatic brain injury happens due to an impact to the head, rattling your brain inside your skull and causing injury to the brain tissue. Number one reason for a traumatic brain injury is falling and hitting your head, followed by being struck by an object in the head and motor vehicle accidents and car accidents. So a TBI can really happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. In fact, there are 69 million cases of TBI annually, and 2.8 million cases in the US each year, and 2.5 million cases in Europe annually. And 90% of these cases are mild traumatic brain injuries, also commonly known as concussions. And you might think that a mild injury is not that important or it's not a big deal, but these concussions can have a long-lasting effects on health. For example, it can cause headaches, from headaches to long-term brain degeneration, for example, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And however, many concussions go undiagnosed. When someone falls and hits their head, for example, they go to the hospital and they go through a neurological examination. And if the patient is looking quite normal or all the neurological signs are there and normal, the doctor may or may not suggest a CT or MRI scan. And however, CT and MRI scans are not sensitive enough to detect small brain injuries. They're very good at detecting bleeding or swelling in the brain, but they are not sensitive enough to detect mild brain injuries and neuronal damage. And they're time consuming, so you have to wait at the hospital for hours to get a CT or MRI scan. They're expensive for the healthcare and for the patients, and they expose patients to harmful radiation. So at Medicortex, we're developing a biomarker-based diagnostic test for diagnosis of traumatic brain injury using non-invasive samples of urine and saliva. We have identified biomarkers in urine and saliva, and the test will easily detect these biomarkers from these samples within minutes, giving the result of either positive, there's brain injury biomarkers and you should go to the hospital, versus if it's negative, there's no brain injury and no need to worry at the moment. We have completed our first clinical trial, collecting samples of body fluids, both urine and saliva, as well as blood, from 12 TBI patients as well as 12 controls. And this is just an example of the analysis. So lectins are binding partners for glycan molecules, which are the sugar attachments in proteins, and we can detect them by this lectin analysis. And this lectin binding analysis was able to distinguish TBI patients from healthy controls. We recently completed a phase 2 clinical study in which we had 24 patients with TBI and 16 patients with orthopedic injuries to rule out the biomarker being present in other injuries, as well as 29 healthy controls. And samples were collected from 5 different time points, and clinical data and CT data of patients were also acquired. And we're currently analyzing the results from this study using a grant from United States Department of Defense. We have currently 3 patents and in both the diagnostic device as well as for the biomarker. Our potential clients are Army paramedics. We have seen a lot of interest from the military. Just like I mentioned, the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense has funded part of the data analysis and of our clinical trial, and it's important application in the Army because during the military service, blasts and explosions can cause brain damage. As well as hospitals and emergency rooms can can rule out brain injury or concussion in patients and decide if they require CT or MRI scans. Paramedics and first responders can test patients on site at the time of injury. And another interesting area is sports teams, especially for contact sports such as American football, soccer, ice hockey, and these kind of sports where concussions are quite common, and the team doctor has to decide at the time of injury if there is a concussion or not, if the player can return back to play or not. Other potential clients are nursing homes, as well as private people, insurance companies, and pharma companies. Brain trauma monitoring market is around above $4 billion US dollars in the US alone. So we are addressing a quite large market. Our competition generally relies on invasive samples. So far, TBI diagnosis has been dependent on either cerebrospinal fluid sampling or blood sampling. There's only one test that's been approved by FDA in the United States, which tests blood biomarkers, and their test has to be done in a laboratory environment by trained personnel. And as well as all the other competitors in this field are using either laboratory confined tests or big tabletop devices, which cannot be applied in the field, which is very important, for example, in military or in sports teams setting. Currently, we are seeking 2 million euros in equity investment for starting a pediatric clinical trial, because concussions and traumatic brain injuries are common in children, as they tend to fall and they have thinner cranial bones, as well as to start the prototype development. So far, we have 1.8 million euro equity from the founder and private investors. And again, we're with the 2 million euro investment, the investor would have 16% of the company equity. We have also acquired non-diluting funding in the form of grants. Our biggest grant is from United States Department of Defense, $1.1 million, and as well as from Finnish government and European Commission. We have an experienced team. Our CEO, Adrian Harrell, is a neurobiologist, and he has an MBA and 25 years of experience in biotech companies and startups. Our medical director, Morten Quist, has worked at the World Health Organization for many years and is an experienced medical doctor. Our head of R&D, Lasse Valima, he's an expert in diagnostics market. And Oscar Haavisto is our research coordinator. I'm actually the most recent member of the team. I'm the product manager. I have finished my PhD at Vanderbilt University in the USA. And our vice president of sales and marketing, Thomas Ward, is an accomplished business person. This is all I'm going to say. Thank you so much for listening.